She sold the clothes off her back to feed her little girl. Now the alien widow has nothing left.
The rain on Tavris 5 was never light. It came down in hard, angled sheets, carried by winds off the Black Sea that made the air smell of rust, wet stone, and salt. Every street on the colony fringe sloped toward the docks, so water rushed along the cobbles in shallow streams, carrying bits of trash and crushed leaves. Tarps hung over the open-air market stalls, patched with mismatched cloth and held down with frayed ropes. The wind snapped them, flinging cold droplets into people's faces. Lyrian kept low under the edge of a tarp that sagged with pooled water, her knees resting on damp planks. She pulled her daughter Sial closer to her side, wrapping what was left of her dark red, ceremonial silk around the girl's narrow shoulders. The silk had once been a mark of standing, fine Zarini Allen weave, dyed deep and warm, but she had sold the outer layers earlier that day. The sale bought one hot meal for her daughter and left her with only a single strip, now soaked and clinging to her. Her eyes stayed on the movement around the stalls, scanning for food sellers who might trade. Most didn't look twice at her. Those who did gave short, sharp shakes of the head. This was the third day she'd come to the market without a credit to her name. The small work she had once done for a temple was gone, along with the temple itself, crushed in the last coastal collapse. She'd been a widow since the same storm had taken her husband. Since then, keeping Sial alive was the only plan she had. Pride kept her from begging. Pride also kept her from leaving. There was no better place to go. The colony fringe was dangerous, but moving inland meant dying slowly from hunger in a settlement where they knew no one. Sial's tunic was too large, the sleeves rolled and damp. She didn't complain. She didn't ask questions about when they would eat again, but her eyes followed every steaming plate that passed. A dozen meters away, Cale Rourn cut through the market on his walk home. He worked at the docks, cataloging crate manifests for incoming trawlers. Tedious work, but steady. He'd been on Tavris 5 for 6 years, long enough to know every stall, every alley, and most of the regular faces. He'd learned to spot trouble before it came close. His goal was simple: finish his shift, get home, dry out, and avoid drawing anyone else's problems into his own small circle. Still, the market was where the colony's real ledger was kept, not in his shipping logs, but in the faces of the people. That was why he always walked this way. Even if he didn't stop, he saw who was slipping, who was missing, and who was new. He told himself that noticing was enough. A food stall ahead steamed in the rain, the air thick with the smell of bone broth, onion, and pepper leaf. A bored vendor leaned on the counter, moving his ladle in slow circles. 1 bowl, 2 credits, the man said to Lyrian without looking up. She straightened, shoulders tight. I have no credits. The vendor's eyes flicked over her. Wet silk, bare feet, mud up to the ankles, and started to turn away. Lyrian stopped him with a single word. Silk. She unlooped the strip from her shoulder. Her movements were deliberate, slow enough to show she wasn't desperate, though her heartbeat was sharp and fast. The wet fabric slid down her arm, heavier than it had been when she'd first wrapped it this morning. She folded it once before setting it on the counter. Without the silk, she was left with a thin underlayer, short, frayed at the edges, plastered to her skin. It's good weave, she said. It will dry. The vendor lifted it between 2 fingers, unimpressed. Still, he dropped it into a crate under the counter and ladled a bowl full of steaming broth, setting it down without ceremony. Lyrian took it in both hands and crouched to give it to Sial. The girl's fingers closed around it like it was something rare and fragile. She lowered her face into the steam, inhaling as if she could drink the heat without touching the spoon. Cale had stopped a few steps away, boots in a shallow puddle, rain running from the brim of his coat. He hadn't meant to pause, but the way Lyrian placed herself between the wind and the child caught him. She wasn't begging. She wasn't looking around for help. She was just there, stripped of everything except the stubborn will to keep the girl warm and fed. He knew that look. The docks were full of men and women who had nothing left but a set jaw and a refusal to bend. She noticed him. Her eyes flashed once in his direction, then looked away. Cale stepped forward. Buy another, he told the vendor. Lyrian turned to him, her voice flat. "We don't take charity." "It's not charity. I'll drink it myself," he said. The vendor was already ladling a second bowl. Kale placed 2 credits on the counter. The coins clinked. Sayal glanced between them. "Mama," she whispered, "your lips are shaking." "They're fine," Lyrian said quickly. "They're blue," the girl said, her voice small but steady. Lyrian's mouth tightened. She took the second bowl, sipped once, then passed it back to her daughter. "Drink while it's hot." Kale drank from the first bowl. It scalded his tongue, but cleared the taste of rain from his mouth. He wasn't sure why he stayed where he was instead of walking away. Maybe it was because her refusal had been real, not an act. Or because the child's voice didn't sound like someone used to speaking in front of strangers. The vendor slammed the lid on the broth vat, signaling the end of his shift. People began to clear out. The light was dropping fast. Kale spoke low, so only Lyrian could hear. "There's a storage shed near the docks. Roof solid, dry inside." She looked at him without blinking. "And what would you want for it?" "Nothing now," Kale said. "If you take it, you can return the favor later." "That's not a fair trade," she said. "It's the only one I'll make." Sayal tilted her head. "Does it have a floor?" "Wood," Kale said. "Off the ground. Warmer than here." Lyrian studied him for a moment longer, then looked away. She didn't answer. Kale adjusted the strap of his satchel and stepped back into the rain. He told himself he was done. But as he walked toward the docks, the image stayed with him. An alien woman standing in the rain, stripped of her last possession so her daughter could eat. And the way the girl had asked about the floor, as if that was the deciding factor between staying in the cold or not. He didn't know if they'd still be there tomorrow. He didn't know if he'd see them again. But if he did, he'd make sure the shed key was ready. The next morning, the rain came heavier. The gutters along the market lane overflowed, spilling sheets of brown water across the stone. The air was colder, sharp enough to bite fingers and ears. Kale walked the same route he always did, oilskin coat drawn tight, satchel slung over his shoulder. The shed key sat in the inside pocket of his coat, small and warm from his body heat. He told himself he was only carrying it in case he saw them. He slowed when the market came into view. The tarp where they had stood yesterday was empty. The vendor from the broth stall was there, packing crates into the back of a small handcart. Kale asked without preamble, the woman, violet skin, silver hair with a child. "Did you see them?" The vendor smirked faintly, as if enjoying the leverage. "They were here early, left before the crowd came. Can't say where." Kale didn't press him. He walked the stalls once, eyes scanning for the small shape of the girl or the distinctive shine of silver hair. Nothing. He told himself to keep moving. If they decided to go inland, it was their choice. But his feet didn't carry him to the docks. They carried him toward the back alleys behind the market, the narrow lanes where rainwater pooled ankle deep and the roofs dripped in steady lines. He found them at the far end of one such lane, crouched under a corrugated awning behind a shuttered spice shop. Lyrian had her arms around Sayal, holding her close to block the wind that cut between buildings. The girl's hair was plastered to her cheeks. Both looked up when he approached, but neither moved. "You didn't take the shed," Kale said. Lyrian's voice was calm, but her eyes stayed watchful. "We didn't know if it was real." "It's real," he said. "Dry roof, wood floor, near the docks. No lock on the inside, only the out. It's not much, but better than this." She adjusted the girl's tunic, wringing water from the hem without looking at him. "Why? You said yesterday you don't trade for nothing." Kale shrugged. "Maybe I don't like seeing someone stand in the rain when there's an empty roof going to waste." Sayal tilted her head at him. "You don't look like someone who helps people." Kale almost smiled, but didn't. "That's because I'm not in the habit. Come on, it's closer than you think." He didn't wait for them to agree outright, just turned and walked at a steady pace that didn't rush them but didn't invite delay. He heard the soft splash of their bare feet in the water behind him, a lighter rhythm than his own boots. The shed sat against the side wall of a warehouse that smelled faintly of rope tar and dried kelp. Kale pushed the swollen door open with his shoulder, stepping inside first. The space was dim, the only light filtering through a high vent. The wood floor was dry except for one corner near the door. The air held a trace of warmth from the adjacent wall, where the warehouse stove's heat bled through. Lyrian stepped inside slowly, eyes moving over the corners. She tapped the wall with her knuckles, checked the latch, and ran a hand along the beam above the door. Sci followed her, then crouched to press a palm to the floor. "It's warm," she said, as if this confirmed something important. "You can stay here," Kale said. "No one uses it unless there's overflow cargo. If you hear a knock that's 3 fast and 1 slow, it's me. Anyone else, don't open." Lyrian's gaze narrowed slightly. "And when the dock master sees us?" "He won't. He has other problems to watch." She didn't thank him. Instead, she asked, "Do you always walk the market after work?" "Every day," Kale said. "To help people?" "No, to know the shape of things." Her eyes lingered on him a moment longer, as if measuring whether that answer meant something she could use. Finally, she nodded once and sat Sial near the warm wall. The girl leaned into it, letting the heat seep into her back. Kale placed the key on a low beam beside the door. "You can keep it," he said. "No one else has one." Sial's voice was soft but certain. "Mama, we can sleep here without hearing the wind." Lyrian didn't respond right away. Kale noticed the way her hand tightened on the child's shoulder, the small pause before she said, "For now." He stepped back to the door. "I'll bring you something dry for your feet tomorrow. The stones outside the docks cut worse than these." Lyrian's tone was even. "And what will you want for that?" "Nothing," Kale said, meeting her eyes without flinching. "You already paid me back." Her brow creased. "When?" "By not letting her sleep in the rain." He left them then, the door closing with a muffled thud. The rain outside had eased to a steady patter, but the streets were still running with water. Kale didn't head straight home. Instead, he took the long route, checking the alleys along the way. He told himself it was habit, but he also knew that tomorrow, if they weren't in that shed, he'd want to know where they'd gone. The night was quieter than either of them had expected. The shed held the heat longer than Lyrian thought it would, a low, steady warmth radiating from the wall that backed onto the warehouse stove. The smell of old pine and rope oil lingered in the air, a scent that was unfamiliar but not unpleasant. Sial lay curled on the blanket Kale had left, her head resting against the warm wall. Lyrian sat near the door, legs crossed, eyes fixed on the single vent above. She could hear the rain outside, but no wind whistled through gaps. It was a strange absence, the kind that made her cautious rather than comfortable. Sial broke the silence first. "Mama, do you think he'll come back tomorrow?" Lyrian kept her voice level. "He said he would, but do you believe him?" She didn't answer immediately. Instead, she watched the girl trace patterns on the wooden floor with one finger. "We'll see," Lyrian said finally. She had learned not to teach certainty too soon. By morning, the rain had turned to a mist that clung to everything. Lyrian stepped outside for the first time since Kale left, scanning the alley. No one had passed during the night. The only sound was the muffled clatter of crates from the other side of the warehouse wall. She checked the latch twice before returning inside. Sial was awake, rubbing her eyes with small fists. "Your clothes are still damp," Lyrian said. "We'll need a fire to dry them properly." "We don't have wood," Sial reminded her. "No," Lyrian said, "but maybe we'll have something else." She was still deciding whether to wait for Kale or seek food on her own when footsteps approached. They stopped outside the door, 3 quick knocks followed by 1 slow, exactly as he had said. Lyrian opened the door partway, enough to see him standing there, coat dripping, a small sack in one hand. "Morning," Kale said. "I brought what I promised." Inside the sack were 2 pairs of dock boots, worn but intact, and a folded piece of thick canvas. "Boots for the stones," he said. "Canvas for the floor, so it stays dry even if the wall leaks in heavy rain." Sial was already trying on the smaller boots before Lyrian could speak. She glanced at Kale, assessing the offer. "You said no trade." "I meant it," he said, "though I might ask for help later." "What kind of help?" she asked, suspicion clear in her tone. "Dock work," he said simply. "I keep track of crates coming in. Sometimes I need someone to note markings or counts when I'm on the far side of the yard. It's not heavy work." Lyrian considered it. Work meant risk, but it also meant fewer exchanges where she had nothing to give. "We'll see," she said. Kale didn't press. He set the canvas on the floor, unrolled it, and smoothed it flat. This will keep the cold from coming up through the boards. Lay the blanket on top, and it'll hold the heat longer. Sayal hopped from one foot to the other in her new boots. They make me taller, she announced, the first hint of cheer in her voice since Kale had met her. That's how good boots should feel, Kale said. Lyrian's gaze softened for a moment, but her voice stayed guarded. You walk the market every day, but you work the docks. Why take the long way home? Because the market shows me what the ledgers can't, Kale said. Ships tell you what's coming in. The market tells you what's missing. And what's missing now? She asked. He looked at her without hesitation. Dry places for people who don't have anywhere to go. For a moment, the air in the shed was still. Lyrian studied him, searching for signs of pity in his face. She found none, only a steady watchfulness. She gave the smallest nod, enough for him to know she'd heard and understood. I'll be back after my shift, Kale said, stepping toward the door. You could tell me then if you want the dock work. After he left, Sayal sat cross-legged on the blanket, tugging at the boots as if making sure they wouldn't vanish. Mama, she said quietly, I think he means what he says. Lyrian didn't answer right away. She was thinking of the last time she'd trusted someone's offer, the last time it had cost her. She glanced toward the door, then down at her daughter. Maybe, she said, but the word came softer than she intended. When the rain started again that afternoon, she realized she hadn't once thought about leaving the shed. The day Kale asked her to come to the docks started with pale light and no rain, a rarity on Tavris 5. The air smelled faintly of salt and fish oil, the wind coming in low from the sea. Lyrian was sitting near the shed door when he knocked. 3 fast, 1 slow. When she opened it, he was already in his work coat, ledger tucked under one arm. If you're willing, today's the day, he said. It's just counting, marking crates. No heavy lifting. Sayal stood behind her mother, holding one boot in her hand. Can I come? She asked. Kale glanced at Lyrian. If you want her to. The dock's loud, but not dangerous. Lyrian hesitated. She'd spent months avoiding open places where people might notice her. But Sayal was staring at her with quiet hope, and Kale's tone wasn't pushing, just stating the option. We'll come, she said finally. They walked the short route together, Kale slowing his pace to match theirs. The closer they got, the sharper the smells became. Wet rope, tar, old wood, and salt-heavy air. Ships loomed at the piers, hulls streaked with rust and barnacle scars. Dockhands and oilskins moved cargo with slow precision, calling numbers over the sound of gulls. Kale led them to a stack of crates beside the main warehouse. He handed Lyrian a short piece of chalk and pointed to markings burned into the wood. These are the registry codes. Just note them here, he said, tapping a spare page in his ledger. If the chalk breaks, there's more in my satchel. Lyrian examined the markings, tracing one with her finger. The characters weren't from her own written language, but they were simple enough to copy. She started marking them down without needing more instruction. Kale kept a few meters away, checking incoming loads and trading quick words with other dock clerks. He noticed how she worked without glancing up, how she stayed alert even while focused. Sayal sat on a nearby crate, swinging her legs and watching ships come in. One of the dockhands, a tall man with a shaved head, passed by carrying a crate. His eyes lingered on Lyrian a fraction too long before moving on. Kale caught it, but said nothing. He'd learned that too much protection too soon could feel like ownership, and ownership was the last thing Lyrian would tolerate. After 2 hours, Kale returned to where she was working. That's enough for today, he said. You've already done more than most of the part-timers I get. She handed the chalk back. You could have done this yourself. I could have, he said, but I wanted another set of eyes. If a crate's been tampered with, I'd rather catch it before it gets unloaded. Sayal hopped down from her seat. We saw 3 crates with the same number, she said. Kale raised a brow. We did. Yes, she said. That man with the shaved head brought 2 of them, and one was already here. Lyrian glanced at her daughter, surprised. Kale smiled faintly. Looks like you've got sharper eyes than me. That's useful. They walked back to the shed together, Kale carrying a small sack. When they reached the door, he handed it to Lyrian. Inside were 2 loaves of dock bread, a jar of pickled root, and a folded length of dry cloth. Payment, he said. I thought this wasn't paid work, she replied. It's not, he said, but if I eat while you go hungry, I'm the kind of man I don't want to be. She studied him for a long moment, weighing his words. Then she took the sack without thanks, but also withoil argument. Sayal sat on the canvas floor, examining the jar. Mama, can we keep him? She asked with total seriousness. Kale chuckled once and turned toward the alley. I'll be back tomorrow. Same knock. When he was gone, Lyrian looked down at her daughter. You don't keep people. Sayal tilted her head. Then maybe just let him keep us. Lyrian didn't answer, but her grip on the sack tightened. Tat evening durain came back harder. Hitting dushed rofvit au citidi, umbroken noise. De air inside stayed warm from the Dyson stored in the Varehuiswall, but the damp crept in along the floorboards. Lyrian laid the cloth Kyle had given her over the canvas, folding it tivige under Sial's sleeping spot. The girl sat crossly, eating slices of dog birrea dipped into the pickled root birine. Yure eating toast, Lyrian sighed. Am eating before ötese gone. Sial replied, without looking up. Lyrian almost corrected her, then stopped it. Hunger had taught them both to move quickly when food was certain. Say let the girl finish. Akno came, tihre fest, one slow. Say opened the door to find Kyle standing there without his coat, carrying a small clay pot wrapped in cloth to keep it warm. Sitev his side. Dog cook owed me a favor. Say Site put acide to let him in. He crouched by the blanket and set the pot down, sitting rising as he unwrapped it. The smell of slow cooked grain, root vegetables, and a trace of meat filled the space. Sial moved closer without being told. Kyle ladled portions into dented metal cups. Ötese better hot his side. Lyrian took hers with both hands, failing the heat seep into her fingers. Say noted he hadn't taken a cup for himself. Aren't you eating? Already did, Kyle sighed. This is for you, Tevil. Say looked at him over the rim of the cup. And even told you we didn't want it. Then I lave it here and walk out, his side plainly. The ate in relative silence. The only sounds the scrape of spoons and the muted drum of rain. Sial finished it first, leaning back against the wall with the satisfied heaviness of someone who hadn't eaten to fullness in weeks. Kyle shifted slightly to sit near the door. His posture stayed relaxed, but his eyes moved over the room, taking in the corners, the latch, the way the blanket was positioned. Lyrian noted it. You're checking for problems, say aside. Old habit, he replied, and don't like surprises in small space. Her gaze lingered on him. Then W yalk into them. Bejause if and don't, someone else will, he sighed. And not all of the mean well. The rain eased for a moment, leaving only the sound of water drip from the airways. Sia yawned and shifted onto her side, pulling the blanket over her head. Kyle looked at Lyrian. You should keep Darmto. The floor pulls it out of you. Only manage, say aside. Not if you're planning to work the dogs again, he countered. Cold slows you down. Slows you down, you make mistakes. Mistakes cost more than staying warm. Say hesitated, then moved closer to the warm wall. The space between them narrowed until Say could feel the faint heat from his shoulder. He didn't move toward her, but he didn't shift away at her. For the first time since they met, Lyrian didn't feel like Say had to guard every inch of space around her. Say still didn't trust him entirely. Trust wasn't something given in dice. But Say found herself not wanting him to leave just yet. When the rain picked up again, Kyle glanced at the door. Unless stay until it slows. No point walking into that unless and have to. Say nodded, not looking at him, and adjusted the blanket so that it covered part of his skin as well as hers. He didn't comment, but his posture eased slightly, Asif de gesture hat ben enog tu close the distance tat yurts hatent. De ein finale easet just before the dawn. De was called enog tat de schetsflur kriket under tveir movements. Lyraen joke first, sitrechin sitif shoulders. Kael was sitil dere, sitting against the wall with his coat draped over him. Het stayed torok the night without saying hevold. Se didn't wake him. Instead, se site put outside into the narrow lane, billeting in the sharp salteir. The streets were empty except for a fey goose picking at a broken crate. Se checked the sky, no heavy cloud, just the pale light of a Taurus morning. The sound came before the sight, heavy boots on whetstone, Tevio men turning into the lane from the market side. Dawkins, se recognized one from the day before. The tal shaveda that man who had carried the mismatched krates. He says landed on her and didn't move away. Thought so, he said to his companion. You're the one from the docks. Lyraen's pulse kicked up, but se kept her steady. And you're using dock space without permission, he said, taking a step closer. Touches for overflow cargo, not for. His gaze swept over her in a white made his meaning clear. Before I say a cold answer, the shed door opened. Kyle stepped out, pulling his coat on, a scan in the lane in one quick pass. Problem. The man smirked. Not yet. Just pointing out rules. Kyle's voice was calm but carried with. The shed is minute to use. You want to check the ledger? Go ahead. But you'll find my name on that storage allocation. And you'll find me using it however unsafe it. The second man shifted uneasily. Come on, he muttered to the first. We got work. The tall one hesitated, holding Lyraen's gaze for a moment longer before turning away. The sound of tire boots faded toward the market. Kyle didn't look at her right away. He checked the lane, then the shed latch. Only after he was satisfied did he turn to her. You could have called me. I didn't need to. Say aside. I'm just speak for myself. You, John, he agreed. But you don't have to when someone's looking for a reason to make it trouble. Her, while ticked it. I may not here to be protected. He made her as evenly. I may not here to protect you. I may here to make sure the people on the GD to help don't get pushed out by men with more boots than brains. There was no softening in his tone, but there was no condescension either. Say suited him for a moment, then gave the smallest nod. Sal's voice called from inside the shed. Mama, is birey fast coming? Lyraen glanced toward the door, then back at Kyle. She say hungry. Unle being something from the docks he sighed. What if John get it past the yard, cook without him noticing? As he yalked away, Lyraen felt the tension in her chest shift. Not gonna, but changed. He had stepped in without taking over, and for the first time, she realized she hadn't felt cornered by it. When she went back inside, Cial was sitting up, rubbing her eyes. Was that the man from yesterday? She asked. Yes, Lyraen sighed. Did he want us to leave? Lyraen crouched down, brushing damp hair from the girl's face. He might have, but where is still here? Cial smiled faintly. Then maybe we stay until the rain stops. Lyraen didn't answer, but her eyes went to the door. There Kyle had stepped out into the street. Kyle returned in the late afternoon, carrying a dented tin kettle wrapped in a cloth and a sack tied with cord. The smell hit before he even reached the door. Spice grain porridge, thick enough to stick to the sides of the kettle, and fried fish from the dockside cockfires. Cial was already on her feet when Lyraen opened the door. Ante se hot, Kyle warned, handing the kettle to Lyraen first. She set it on the canvas floor, failing the heat tore up the cloth. Teres enog for tonic then tomorrow morning, he sighed, unting the sack to reveal Tigre's smile. golden fish fillets wrapped in paper. Dokund pie adet vita find halfasmile. Sial sat krosele, is on the food as if it might vanish if se bilinket. Vejanit no? Se asket. Liraen glanget at kael. Gone. Se side to herdokter. Sial dugin, tearing the fish into small bits and bruising on ach before eating. Kael stayed near the door, leaning against the wall, not taking anything for himself. Liraen notiget. If you're not eating, say side, you've ate her already hot enough or you're waiting for me to offer. He shook his head. Ate yerlier. Button called use the company yile yudo. Something in his tonemade her pose. Say picked up one of the fillets and took a bite. The crisp seeking giving way to tender meat. It was the first farm well-cooked tank shade had in weeks that didn't taste like trade scraps. For a while, the only sound was the quiet scrape of cups and the muted hum of the varahais stotorog the wall. Then Kyle spoke. Juve ben here on Tauros beslon gertanutot. You move like someone who knows the secrets. Lirain looked up from her cup. I ben here nearly a year. Longertan wanted. W.A. sty. He asked, not in accusation, but genuine curiosity. Bejao se every ship out costs more than a jampai. And the feyon cold. They don't go on here worth the risk, say he aside. Her voice stayed even, but her hands tightened on the cup. And Bejao se my doctor doesn't belong in a place where no one would even say her. Kyle nodded slowly. I came here 6 years ago. Told myself it was temporary. The work was steady, and the port wasn't as bad then. But one says on Benjamin on her, and moving on felt like starting over. Say studied him for a long moment. And no one here Bejao se unknow how it works, he sighed. Unknow where the gaps are, and Ujan live in them. Doesn't mean and don't want more. Just means I stop it pretending until say going to happen by accident. Sia looked betjendum, changing slowly. If you both don't like it here, W.A. don't you love it to get here. Liraen froze, jaft off guard. Kyle didn't speak for several seconds. Finally, he sighed. Bejao se living is the easy part. Staying without letting this place change you. That's harder. Sial fronet. And don't think mama's changed. Liraen's gazette dropped to her doctor. Not yet. They sighed quietly. The room went still for a few seconds. Then Kyle stepped away from the wall and crouched by the kettle. Eat the rest before it cools, he sighed. And lay back tomorrow. Liraen didn't thank him. But when he reached the door, Say asked, what happens if someone else wants the shed? They'll have to come toward me, he said, without looking back. Then he was gone, leaving the smell of sea air and fish in his wake. That night, after Sial was asleep, Liraen lay awake for a long time, listening to the quiet and realizing he hadn't planned for tomorrow in months. No, without meaning to, say was. The next morning, bright a calm Tauros besharely saw. The air was still, the sea was flat, and the market lanes were washed clean from the weeks of rain. Liraen hooked to the pale light coming toward the shed vent, and the sound of Sial quietly humming as she lodged up her boots. Tigre faced Knox, one slow, came at the door. She opened it to find Kyle holding a small wooden crate. End of season shipment came in early, he sighed. Got my hands on a few times before the dockmaster's man took Taishare. Inside the crate was a folded wool blanket, a small tin of preserved fruit, and a Kilian thick shirt in her size. Practical items. Only enough to smell of the storage hole they come from. Sial says within it at the fruit tin. John will open it now. Kyle nodded. Öteyle cape, but better yile ötese fileş. Dui ate to get her in the shed, the sweet fruit jutting, torok, weeks of salt and starch. Kyle sat on the floor, this time instead of leaning at the door. His long legs folded awkwardly in the small space. When they were done, Liraen set the MP, thin aside and looked at him directly. You were done enog. More, than enog. It wasn't about enog, Kyle said. It was about whether you'd stay. Say didn't answer right away. Ciel was running her fingers over the new blanket, the wool jutting in the small lines of her hands. I didn't trust you, Liraen admitted. Not at first. I thought you were like the others, offering something no so you could take more later. And no, he asked. No one know you're not waiting for anything back, say aside. Say hesitated, then added, that's W önce give you something. Kyle tilted his head. What? The shoes to keep usere. Say said plainly. Bejao se örme not looking for somedere else anymore. Utlandet betjane, dum with more wheat, tan any trade or promise tede made before. Kyle didn't simile, but the line off his shoulders said. Ciel, who had been pretending not to listen, grinned. So that means we're staying. Liraen glanced at her doctor, then back at Kyle. It means we're staying. Kyle stood, brushing dust from his hands. Then we'll need to fix the shed door before the next storm season, and get another blanket. And, Kyle, Liraen interrupted, sit. Just for I will. No jobs, no repairs, just sit. He sat again, and for the first time, they were all close enough that the warmth between them came as much from proximity as from the wall behind. By midday, the market outside was filling again. Voices drifted in, dog calls, the clatter of carts, the distant sound of ghouls. Inside the shed, there was only quiet, broken by Ciel's softly sighing. Then were a family of. No one argued with her. Weeks had passed since Liraen and Ciel chose to stay. The shed had changed in ways only people who leave it there every day will notice. The patchet was no longer lit in wind. The floor was layered with thick canvas and cloth. Kyle had built two shelves from Skagen's wood, one for practical things like cups, dry food, and blankets. The other for Ciel's terrasures, smooth stones, shells from the coast, and the thin fruit container they refused to throw away. The day had been bright and calm. The kind Tauro specially gave them. Kyle had finished work early and taken them both along the quiet coast road. The sea was gently, waves breaking low on black stone. Ciel ran ahead, her pockets filling with shells, her laughter carrying on the breeze. Liraen and Kyle walked behind, shoulders close, their pace unhurried. Ötesi different out here, say aside, like the colony isn't pressing in on you. That's W uncommon and John, Kyle replied. It gives me room to think before going back. Say glanced at him, and no you're not coming here alone. No, he sighed, and nothing more was needed. By the time they returned to the shed, dusk was settling. Ciel drew into her blanket almost as soon as they came inside, her hand still clutching the largest shell she'd found. Her breathing slowed into sleep within minutes. Kyle closed the door, checked the latch, and came to the Liraen was sitting by the warm wall. In the dim lamplight, her silver hair jabbed a soft glow. She looked at him without the guarded expression she'd worn for weeks. You stayed that first night Bejause of the Rhine, say aside. W.A. do you Steinhoff? Bejause and want to, he answered without hesitation. Her hand reached out, fingertips brushing his arm. He moved closer, his palm resting at the side of her neck, warm and steady. She leaned into the touch. When the kiss said, it was slow, deliberate. There were people who had waited, step by step, for this moment. Her hand slid to his chest, feeling the steady and fall of his spirit. He sought her hand settled at her hip, holding her without pulling, as if to remind her she was choosing every movement. She didn't pull away. The rain began again, soft at first, tapping the roof. They moved carefully, without the rush of strangers but with the certainty of people who had already shattered more than yards. Every gesture was unhurried. The shift of the blanket beneath them, the warmth building, the retired body smith, the sound of their breathing blending with the rain outside. When they finally lay seated, her head rested against his shoulder, his arm wrapped securely around her. Neither spoke for a long time. The air in the shed was warm now, almost heavy with the closest steady shade. Ciel murmured something in her sleep and rolled over, the shell still in her hand. Kyle glanced toward her and then back at Liraen. Very good, Here, he said quietly. She didn't hesitate. Very good, Here. TVO weeks later, the storms eased. The market lanes were washed clean, and sunlight broke through for the first time in days. Ciel was outside in the lane, hopping from one patch to another, but stood in softly. Kyle was in the shed, mending a crack in the lower wall beam with a strip of wood and nails. Kyle Liraen sight from behind him. He turned, leaping sawdust from his hands. What is it? She stepped closer, her expression steady but her eyes bright. We'll need more space on. He frowned. Space for yet. John built another shelf. She rested a hand on her stomach. Not for a shelf, for a bed. A small one. The meaning hit slowly, then all at once. His mouth opened, closed again, and a new expression settled on his face, unfiltered warmth, et get with age. Yure sure. Ome sure, say aside. I've been sure for a year. I just needed to know it was hours before I inside. He set the hammer aside and stepped in close, covering her hand with his. You didn't take anything from me. You gave me something and didn't know on cold have here. Ciel's voice came from the doorway. W.A. Are you holding Mama like that? Liraen crouched to her after saying, keeping one hand on her stomach. Bejau say you're going to have a little brother or sister. Ciel froze for half a heartbeat, then broke into a wide simile. Our sister? No, a brother. No, both. She laughed at her own confusion before flinging her arms around Liraen. John de sleep herevitus. And John showed them my shells. And then they teach them the safe place in the market. Kyle crouched beside them. You'll be the one they look up to first, he sighed. Ciel beamed, checks flushed. Then I'm going to tell them you're good people, say sighed to Kyle, completely serious. The three of them stayed close like that for a moment. The shed warm with more than just the heat from the wall. Outside, the sea breeze carried the faint smell of salt, but inside there was only the quiet sound of a new leaf settling in. That night, after Ciel had fallen asleep under the new blanket, Liraen sat with Kyle by the door, their hands lashed together. There were storms still to come. There always will be on Tauros Beach, but no, there was no question. When they came, there will be four of them inside, warm and together. And the sound of the rain on the roof will belong entirely to their home.